Good morning, dear students. Today we are going to have a lecture on Asian literature for second MA. Before going to start with the Asian literature, we need to have a small introduction about it, where we'll be studying what is the need of Asian literature when we have a canopy of so many literatures in the world. And what do the Asian literature exclusively have to tell, have to deliver to this world? Then we should learn what are the features, the uniqueness of Asian literature. After knowing these things, we shall move into our syllabus. Before moving into our syllabus, we should know what does this Asian literature comprise. Asian literature comprise the literature written from a variety of nations which are together named as continent Asia. On seeing this map, you could understand that Asia includes so many countries like India, Pakistan, China, Mongolia, some parts of Russia, Iran, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. On in this east, it includes Korea, Japan, and China. So it's a canopy of so many cultures, so many nations, and so many languages. Though much part of Russia falls under European continent, the eastern and southern part of Ural Mountains fall under Asian continent. Before moving to the study of Asian literature, we should know what made Asiatics write about themselves, present themselves, what made them self-defining. In order to understand that, we should be introduced to a person called Edward Said. Edward Said is a professor of English from Columbia University who brought out a book called Orientalism in the year 1978. This Orientalism has become a way of seeing, imagining and emphasizing and exaggerating and distorting the difference of cultures in comparison with Europe. So Orientalism is seeing at the non-Europeans in a uncivilized, backward and exotic manner. Under this title Orientalism, Said compares the Eastern with the West, and he calls all other than the West as the other, who are collectively regarded as backward, uncivilized, and exotic. I hope you all would remember the words of Rudyard Kipling, the author of um, Jungle Book, where he says, it is white man's burden to civilize this uncivilized, to educate, to uplift this exotic. God has given them the burden of civilizing the entire world, civilizing the entire other. So Europeans think that they are more civilized and they are superior. This type of outlook is what we call as Oriental. Orientalism is a book that deals with this type of outlook. So, with this perspective, we are going to approach this Asian literature where we are going to study or search for the exclusive, unique feature of Asian literature through which the Asiatic voice out themselves, voice out to the West to prove themselves they are not uncivilized, they are not exotic, but on the other, they are very civilized, have a very old age history, very old culture and tradition. So in the unit one, we are having poetry, which is by Bei Dao. It is a Chinese. He is a Chinese writer, and Bei Dao is his pen name. His poem is Moon Festival, which is based on the mythology, the folklore of Moon Festival. And the second one is Balakrishna Sama, a Nepali writer whose poem The Song. It will remind us of the romantic writers. It will remind us of Keats' The Skylark, I mean Shelley's Skylark. Similarly, we have Faiz Ahmad Faiz, a Pakistani writer, When the Autumn Came. He would remind us of Shelley's West Wind, definitely. And in this unit 2, we are going to have prose, where we have Lafcadio Hearn's Mosquitoes. He is a Japanese writer who very much resembles the style of Stephen Leacock. Stephen Leacock, whose essays have a kind of um, a humorous tone in it, whose essays are very entertaining, not that much stiff like that of Bacon's essays. Then we have Vijay Tunga, a Sri Lankan writer's Village Ghost Town, where he talks about the transformation, the metamorphosis of villages into towns due to this industrial revolution and the spread of technologies. And in Unit 3, we are going to have Frank Chen, a Chinese writer, The Year of Dragon Zeni. Dragon, once again, an iconic image of Chinese and Japanese literature, which is a mythical figure who is believed to be their deity, their savior. Similarly, Motokyo, a Japanese writer whose Hogoromo, meaning the feather mantle, is going to be a beautiful drama in three acts. Then we have in Unit 4 three short stories, one by Sri Lankan writer Sunetra Raja Kumaranayake. And the title is SMS. This is going to be the story of an NGO girl who gives an account of a glimpse of the Elam people. How do they suffer? What has become of their life? How the NGOs are helping out the nation to get back into normality. So it's going to be a picture of the suffering of Ilam people. Then we have Blue Suns, a Chinese writer whose a little incident is it's going to be a very heart touching story where we see a rickshaw puller's behavior changes the entire attitude of a young man who was of course is rich, and he is taught a lesson by a rickshaw puller. And Zogwi Myanmar, a Burmese writer whose short story is His Spouse. His Spouse is going to be a very interesting short story like that of R.K. Narayan's, where we see a small family with a husband, wife, and two children. And his husband remains very idle without going to for any job, and his wife has to earn for the entire family. In such a case, the wife tries to teach a lesson to her husband, and how does she teach him her lesson forms the short story. Then in Unit 5, we are going to have a series of fiction, of which first one is Kamila Shamsi, a Pakistani writer's cartography. Cartography meaning study of land, study of place and space. Most of the Pakistani writings will be about partition, the identity, the uprootedness of the people from their birthplace, and where once again rooted into a new land, and they struggle for the identity. That's what is going to be the theme of this cartography. Then we have Kyung Soon Shin, a Korean writer, who's Please Look After Mom. This is going to be also be a very interesting piece of work. Before moving to these topics, we should know something, a background about the culture, tradition, myths, the literary genres, the literary uniqueness of each country so that we can understand or interpret those literature better. For example, I have grouped Chinese, Japanese, and Korean literature under one category because they are going to share much of the features as common. For example, Chinese and Korean languages are going to share a common script of their language. Of course, Chinese script is called as Haines, and Korean script is called as Kenji. Though these two scripts are very much different from themselves, Korean language borrows much of the vocabulary, much of the scripts from Chinese language. And all these Chinese, Japanese, and Korean traditions are very uh, oldest, one of the oldest in the world, and their literatures seek for lyrical quality in them. They give importance to the musicality of their writing. They stress on tone, rhyme, and music. And almost all their poems are meant to be sung with the accompaniment of music. If they don't find music, they would chant that poetry as if a music is played on in the background. So their poetry is meant to be sung or chanted. Then they all aim at brevity. Their poetry is very brief. For example, I hope you all would have heard about the word haiku, one of the shortest form of poetry, which has only four lines, and it has a mention of seasons in it. So that's what is haiku. Then their literature give importance to history, love themes, social criticism, folklore, and of course mythologies. Folklore and mythologies are going to occupy much of the part of their literature because they have very rich tradition, very rich culture, which might date back older than that of the Egyptians or even Roman and Greeks. So this is what is. Then we are going to have Nepali and Myanmar literature. I have categorized these two literatures together because, being the neighboring countries, they are going to share much of the similarities in language, in script, in culture, tradition, history, and many. So these literature have much of the influence of Indian and Thai cultures. Of course, being the neighboring countries, they have much of influence of India also. Um, for example, these literature also have their own, I mean, have our Ramayana in their own um, uh, tradition, right? For example, in Ramayana, they'll have the characters of dragon and all, which is an iconic figure in Nepali, Myanmar, and Chinese literature, right? So they too hold our Ramayana as a part of their literary tradition. They too have Jataka tales as we do have. They also have epics and odes, and their literature give importance to folklore, religion, especially Buddhism. Then there is a very big place for nature, love, and mythologies. See here, I have mentioned a name of epic, and I was talking about brevity in case of Chinese and Japanese literature.